Mhm.
Okay, so the topic that we were going to debate, just to fill in whoever may be watching, is I claimed on Twitter that I think I basically believe that the higher rates of things like mental illness, STDs, just general negative outcomes associated with being homosexual are a product of things like social stigma and discrimination that are levied against homosexual people. And I think I don't want to like get too far into your position. I guess you can explain it a bit more, but I think you are of the position that it's the opposite. It's that these negative outcomes are associated with homosexuality because homosexuality is something that's just intrinsically bad, and that's why we stigmatize it. So I'm sort of getting like the order of causation wrong, I guess. So yeah, what's your sort of position on that?
Well, I would ask, would these people be stigmatized if they stayed in the closet? Why are they advertising that they're homosexual? Like, how does the usual story go? You tell your parents that you're gay and they kick you out,
Mm-hmm.
right? So why did you tell them? Yeah, are you an idiot, right? Like,
Well, yeah,
are
but
you trying to cause problems?
I think the argument would be that we shouldn't be in a society where parents react to that announcement that way, because kids having to like keep who they are secret from their parents leads to like a lot of like fucked up shit happening with them. It leads to like
Well,
worse mental states and like higher rates of like depression, suicidal ideation, etc. So the ideal solution would be to foster a scenario wherein kids can come out to their parents and they don't need to keep it in because their parents just accept that, right?
yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from, but everyone has skeletons in their closet that they don't advertise because abnormal people, uh, they get hammered down. They say a nail that sticks out gets hammered down, right? So, homosexuality, that's like a minority thing, and if you're advertising that you're gay, you're just asking for problems. I don't know why anyone would advertise that they're gay. Like when you apply for a job, do you say I'm gay? Like, is that a desired quality now?
Well,
Um,
yeah. So I think
so
what you're kind of getting at is like this is sort of like a minority thing to be, and so like it's inevitable that like you're gonna get like stigmatized if you like come out as that thing. I don't know if that's like necessarily the case. I think like people who are like redheads, for example, like gingers. I think this is like a pretty substantial minority of the population, and yet I don't think people are being like stigmatized or discriminated against in any substantial way for being like gingers. So I don't think that, just being a part of a minority identity necessarily requires that you be stigmatized and discriminated against for that.
well,
And I think the
well, hold on.
normative question here is whether or not we should discriminate again, not like whether that currently happens, but whether that ought to be something that happens. And I would argue that because this discrimination causes a lot of undue suffering on these people, there's no reason to do this.
Gingers are made fun of. I think ginger, that's like the new FAG.
Um, Maybe. I mean, if you look at like suicide rates of like gingers, for example, it's nowhere near the suicide rates of like homosexuals. If you look at like
Right, right.
the amount of gingers who've been rejected by their family for being ginger, it's nowhere near the rate of like homosexuals. So like, I mean, I guess you could say like, gingers are like made fun of in their second grade classroom sometimes, but this is like
Mhm.
nowhere near the scope of what we're talking about and with like homosexuals. And
Yeah,
again,
I understand there's a disparity there. But the thing is, homosexuals, they don't have to advertise that they're gay, and then they don't have to face social stigma.
well,
So,
it's not about
uh,
like advertise like the example that you gave earlier is like a kid comes out to their parents. I mean, that's not advertising like your sexuality. That's literally just being honest with people who are close to you about like who you are in a really like fundamental way, right? Like I don't think this is like necessarily akin to like advertisement. And like the normative question that we have to grapple with is like, should there be a situation where people are being made to be stigmatized just because of their sexuality, and people have a negative reaction to that. And I don't think that like we should, and I haven't heard like an argument as to the effect of why we should do that.
it, So, like, let's narrow it down to a single gay person that gets kicked out of their home, right?
Hmm.
Do you think that they didn't know that their parents weren't going to tolerate that?
Maybe they did, but again, the question isn't like the question is like, should gay people be forced to hide this from their parents in order to not get kicked out of the house? And I don't think that they
Well,
should.
no one's forcing them. They're making this decision on their own to, tell people, like, they know their parents don't like gay people. They tell their parents they're gay. Like,
Sure.
they're being provocative.
Well, okay. So first of all, this isn't like really a question of like because I know you said like they knew they were going to get kicked out of the house, and so what they should have done is just like keep it in and don't tell anyone. But the question is, should we live in a society wherein gay people are forced to keep it in order to not be kicked out of their house? I don't think that is like a very compelling argument, because I think that like having to keep who you like what your sexuality is concealed from like your parents and your peers, I think empirically this causes like a lot of fucked up shit with people's like causes a lot of like suicidal ideation, mental illness, a lot of these kinds of things. So I don't
Well,
think we should live in a
uh,
society where that's the dichotomy. It's either you keep it a secret, which harms you, or you come out, which doesn't harm you. I'm interested in mitigating harm, so I don't think we should be doing any of this, right?
well, I don't think you have any evidence for this because people that were in the closet and committed suicide, there's no data for that. They never came out.
Well, no, but we have data for people who like lived or who were like stigmatized by their parents, and how that affects like their mental like their mental cognition or whatever. So like for
Mm-hmm.
example, like children who like are now out but had parents for in years kept it in because they weren't their parents weren't accepting, tend to have like much higher rates of things like suicide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I would wonder if they would commit suicide if they just kept it in the whole time and like didn't advertise it to the world. Because the way the world responds to you is based on your personal choices. If you choose to advertise yourself as gay, you might get beat up. I know if you go to prison and you tell people you're gay, you're going to get beat up, right? And who's going to beat you up? The people, like, if you're not in prison, you get beat up, you're going to get beat up by the people who eventually will be in prison, right? Like, they're out there, and you're just, it's like painting a target on you.
Yeah, so like would you okay, so what I would ask is would you deny that so like would you deny that having to like keep secret who you are from people who you love, and knowing that if you were honest, the people who you love would not accept you? Like, I think that's a pretty heavy. Like, I mean, I could provide studies on this. I think this is a like. I don't even think you need studies to like accept this premise. I think knowing that like if I were honest about who fundamentally who I am, my family would like not accept me for that. I think that's like a pretty heavy mental burden to bear. So the question is. That I'm like asking you is, why should we live in society, why should we live in a society where a gay person has to either be forced to keep themselves secret and know that their like loved ones wouldn't accept them, or face like harsh discrimination and bullying for being open about who they are? Like, what, like, wouldn't it be overall better, and just in terms of like net utility, wouldn't it cause immensely less suffering to just have a society where gay people who come out are accepted?
Sure. Well, the way I see it is that we all keep secrets. We all have our peeves and skeletons in our closet. If I got a shit stain on my underwear, is that like a fundamental who I am? Do I need to tell the world? Right.
Well,
Uh,
sure. So like of course we all have secrets, but like some secrets are like more culturally important or like important to one's identity than other secrets, is like the thing I would say there. And additionally, the question like if I can point to a certain secret that a lot of people have to hold that necessarily causes undue suffering on massive swaths of people, then it would follow that if we're interested in reducing human suffering, then we ought to make it so that people don't have to keep that a secret anymore. And I don't think appealing to like, well, people keep other secrets as well is like very compelling argument, I guess. Like that would be like if I were to say like, hey, we should make like murder illegal, um, because I think like murder being legal causes like a lot of harm in society, and you were to say like, well, I don't buy that argument because like people would still commit other things that should be crimes as well, and it's like I just don't think it follows that like yeah I don't think that follows.
So, I mean, murderer is a pretty fundamental identity. Like, do they need to come out and announce to the world that they're murderers?
Well, no, but
You
okay,
know?
so we the reason that we generally have a society that's not accepting of murderers is a good reason, is because if we accepted murderers, then there would be a lot more murder, which means more people dying. So, in order for
Uh huh.
that to be an apt analogy, you would have to prove how people being gay causes harm to society in the same way that people being murderers causes harm
Well,
to society.
I mean, it upsets people. It
Sure,
causes emotional suffering in the parents that find out that their kid's gay.
but you're begging the question, because if I'm saying, um, why should we live in a society where people react negatively to homosexuality, and your answer is because people react negatively to homosexuality, it's like, well, okay, but the question is, why should that be the case?
Uh, well, I mean, it kind of just is. I mean, I don't know. I couldn't tell you exactly why. We could speculate
But do you
on
think it
all
necessarily
kinds of
has to be
reasons.
the case? Do you think that there can't be a society wherein these people aren't stigmatized? And if there can be such a society, why shouldn't we move towards that if it alleviates human suffering?
You broke up.
Oh, okay.
Wait,
So,
wait, wait. You broke up.
can you hear me now?
Hmm.
Okay. So, I think what I was saying is, do you think that homosexuality, because you're kind of saying like, it just is stigmatized? Do you think that this is something which, um, do you think that this is something which necessarily has to be stigmatized? Like, we literally couldn't create a society wherein it's not stigmatized? Because if we can create such a society, even if you're correct that people just naturally stigmatize it in our current society, then if we could create an alternative society that alleviates human suffering, I think it would still be preferable to do that, right?
Hmm. Well, I don't think social engineering is very effective. I mean, you're talking about convincing everyone that they shouldn't stigmatize gay people, but
Well, I mean, it
you
kind of
you, you couldn't even convince everyone that the world is round. You know.
sure. So like two things there. I would say for one, as far as like you can't convince everybody. I mean, we've already seen like massive numbers of people being convinced. Like if you look at like rates of acceptance of homosexuals in the U.S. Or like levels of acceptance of things like gay marriage in the U.S., rates of acceptance have been like massively increasing over just like I mean like doubling over like 10 years. I mean, this is like definitely something that can happen.
Hmm.
You can't convince everybody, just like you can't convince anybody that the earth is round, or you can't convince anybody about anything. But, like, if you convince enough people to the extent where, like, gay children aren't being stigmatized and rejected by their parents en masse, then that's a massive, like, that's a massive benefit to society that alleviates a lot of human suffering. And so, why shouldn't we
Uh-huh.
do that?
Well, I think you're going to find that there's a urban and rural divide. I think the urban people are more willing to accept it, and the rural people aren't.
Yeah, sure, but I mean, we've seen acceptance in general across like both urban and rural communities like going up. I don't deny that like people in urban communities are generally going to be less quickly to accept it, but whether or not people in urban communities are going to be slower to accept homosexuality is a fundamentally different question from whether or not we should work towards making that change
Mhm.
regardless.
Well, yeah, I understand that the people pushing this stuff have good intention, but the way I see it, if you can't go into a prison and convince them that the prisoners that they should tolerate gay people, I think gay people are still going to experience violence
So
anywhere.
I mean, I don't think that necessarily follows, because I don't think like prisoners are like a representative sample of like the rest of the population. So we could very clearly see
Well,
a scenario where like
they
it's not
represent.
accepted among prisoners, but it is accepted among like the general like population. Also, I don't think we have any evidence that there couldn't be a scenario where we push for societal wide acceptance of homosexuality, and
Well,
as a
hold on.
result, Yeah.
The prisoners are a representative of the general society of violent people, the
Okay.
people that will beat up the homosexual. You know.
Sure, but a lot of the people who are causing a lot of the problems for homosexuals aren't like violent criminals. It's like their parents who aren't necessarily gonna like beat them up or kill them, but they're just going to like maybe kick them out of the house or say things like "I don't accept you," which does like a lot of harm to homosexuals. Additionally,
Mm-hmm.
I would argue actually that if we had a society which was broadly accepting of homosexuals, then the extent to which violent criminals target specifically homosexuals would be like lower as well. But again, I don't think that's like the majority of the harm that homosexuals experience.
So, how would you go about convincing someone that they should tolerate homosexuals?
Well, I mean, just like the same way that we've already been doing it and evidently pretty successfully. Just like normalization through things like media, like, like having gay people like represented in like TV or celebrity culture or like other forms of media. Like, I mean, like these kinds of things can be really effective at sort of like normalizing homosexuality in a lot of people's minds. Even just like making arguments publicly as to why homosexuals should be accepted. I mean, even if you look at like the Republican Party in the US at least used to like hardcore be anti gay. But like over time, because we've like made arguments and normalized it across society, so many Americans support homosexuality now that Republicans literally cannot be openly anti gay.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've seen what you're saying. It hasn't had much effect on me. I remember. I mean, my intuition, from a young age, was that homosexuals were weird, and I didn't like it. No one had to like pull me aside and be like, "Watch out for those gay people." Some of my earliest memories were,
Well,
disowning my gay friends.
Well, I don't think that cultural attitudes necessarily have to be like transmitted. That I don't think cultural attitudes have to be transmitted like that blatantly, right? Like you can even just develop the idea that homosexuals are weird, not by somebody sitting you down and telling you that they're bad, but maybe just even through not seeing them represented in media that much, or like hearing passing remarks that other people make on TV or at home about like homosexuals being bad. Even like very like subtle remarks can sort of build these cultural attitudes, especially if you're young. But
Mm-hmm.
I would say the like two things. One, I don't think that like there is any evidence that like the stigmatization of homosexuality is like a natural human response rather than something that's homosexually ingrained. I think we can look at like a wide variety of societies which haven't been largely stigmatizing of homosexuals, so I don't think this is like a natural innate reaction. And
Are there any
B,
today?
I mean, there are like, I mean, if you look to places like Finland, Sweden, Norway, these places rank like much higher in like social progressiveness indexes and like are much more accepting of homosexuals. Even like the U.S. has become like much more accepting of homosexuals like over time. So this definitely is something that can vary massively and change. So I don't think it's an innate reaction. And even if this was an innate reaction, I think there is an argument to be made that to say that therefore we ought to keep it would be like a naturalistic fallacy. Like we could say, even if I were to grant the premise that humans have a innate like negative reaction to homosexuality, it would still be preferable and it would alleviate human suffering to try and do away with this like natural inclination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, you're talking about social engineering, and I don't really have much opinion on it because it hasn't been effective on me.
Sure,
Um,
but it's been effective on like the broader population, like at least in the U.S. I'll try to like
mhm.
hold on, hold on. I gotta find something real quick. So like just to look at this graph according to like Pew Research, the percentage of people across like different religions, even across like the groups you were appealing to, who like should be less likely to accept homosexuality. Homosexuality from 2001 to 2014 has like risen from 13% to 23% among like white evangelical Protestants. It's jumped from like 30 or 40% to 59% among like Catholics. If you want to look at like the broader population, the idea that same-sex marriage should be valid among the general population has gone from 27% in 96 to 55% in 14. So it does seem like, I mean, I don't know if I would call it like social engineering has like a really like I guess spooky connotation to it. This is just convincing the population that something isn't bad, but it seems like it has been pretty effective for like the broader population.
Uh-huh. Well, I would also be skeptical of these measurements, like the qualitative meaning of these measurements. Like personally, I'm not offended by gay marriage, but I wouldn't I wouldn't want to share a glass, like if I had a glass of water, I wouldn't want to share that with a gay person because they lick butthole and it's dirty. It's these little things that like about. If somebody advertises that they're gay, right? You get this imprint in your mind of shit that they do, and
Sure.
I don't think people want to know that.
Sure. So I think like I mean I think that when it comes to like the validity of the metric of like same-sex marriage or whatever, I think the percentage of Americans who think that same-sex marriage is like a valid concept, I think that
Sure.
that's like a pretty good measure of how society at large feels about like gay people. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about like the percentage of Americans who would feel comfortable sharing a glass of water with a homosexual. I'm just talking about the percentage of Americans who are broadly don't believe that homosexuality is something wrong or something to be like condemned for. Um, so yeah.
I think marriage. I don't think that's a good way to measure sentiment because we're talking about government marriage, which is basically just like a property contract for inheritance purposes. Um, when the normal person thinks of like man and woman marriage, like marriage is a religious thing. It's comes from the church. The government kind of co-opted that and made it into a property contract. And I don't see how any libertarian could be opposed to gay marriage, because it's just a contract between two people. It's not like a union under God.
Sure. So I mean, for one, I mean, like sure, but I think that I don't. I think that broadly in the U.S., marriage is something with a degree of like cultural significance, and a lot of people think of marriage as if it has something, as if it has some like degree of sanctity to it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
people in the U.S. thinking that homosexuals shouldn't be excluded from that goes to show that there's a shifting attitude in like the morality of homosexual broadly. But even if you want to look at like different metrics, right? Um, we can look at based on Gallup research, the amount of people in the general population who thinks that homosexual relations are quote morally acceptable is following the exact same trend, and that it's like massively over increasing over like the past few decades, not
say,
even the
say
past
that
few
last part again.
decades,
You cut
even
out.
the past few years. I'm saying even if you look at other metrics like not marriage, but like directly what we're talking about, as in Gallup poll data, which asks people about whether or not homosexual relations are morally acceptable, that number has been following the exact same trend, and that it's been like people are becoming much more accepting of it, even over just the past few years.
Mm-hmm. Now, are these Gallup polls? Are they going out to the rural area, or are they doing this in San Francisco?
These are nationally representative surveys. So it's not like a specific region. It's just like society at large. But I would argue that like even if rural communities are like culturally to the right of like or even if like yeah, so even if rural communities are culturally to the right of like urban communities, if society in
Mm-hmm.
general is like this is like the idea of like the Overton window, like if society in general is moving left, then urban communities are still going to be on the right, but they're not going to be as right as they previously were when the general population was closer like to the right. Um, so,
Yeah, I see the urban areas moving left, but
oh, okay.
I can't say I've experienced that in the rural areas. Um, and well, I mean that's ultimately how a debate goes. One side claims they win. The other side says, no, you falsified that. You falsified your data. You misrepresented the data. It's this endless cycle of, debate was actually invented by the first estate, and we've just been going with it.
Yeah, sure.
I think, the purpose of science is to illuminate theory. And whether or not you believe a theory, that is your personal opinion. I'll give you an example. Let's say the magician flies into the air, right?
Hmm.
And the kid asks, how did he do that? So one guy theorizes that he's pulled up by a rope, and the other guy theorizes that he had an air cannon under him to blast him up, right? These are rational propositions, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now which one is correct is extra scientific, right? We've laid out our theories, and which one's true is your opinion. You can do your investigation, find the ropes, but the guy that believes in theory number two, say you're lying. Yes,
Hmm.
this boils down to personal opinion.
Yeah,
So,
so I think so like the first thing I want to say is like I was like I did like some like a quick search for like some of this data. It seems like the difference at least according to a source called Politics and Society Between Elections 2019 from the Azim Premji Foundation, did a poll and comparing rural and urban attitudes on homosexuality. In
uh huh,
2019, rural communities thought that or like 40 percentage of people um were like oh, fuck, am I getting this wrong? Okay, sorry. So like it seemed like 47% are like in favor of homosexuality, and that number's like 53% in urban communities or something at the time that this study was done. um so I mean there doesn't seem to be like a massive difference in opinion between like urban and rural communities. And it
yeah.
seems like rural
But did you
communities are also like
did you
drifting leftward
control?
over time.
Wait, did you control for the migration of carpetbaggers?
No.
You know what I mean by that?
No.
Californians moving to Texas.
Oh, okay. Um, no, I don't think it controlled for that. I don't know how prevalent that is. I mean, this wasn't just in Texas. This was like in like rural communities in general. But yeah, like I
Right.
mean, the
But
overall like consensus of the data like seems to be that rural communities, urban communities, society at large, these things are all like generally drifting leftward in their opinions on homosexuality. And even if urban
mhm.
communities couldn't be pushed couldn't be pushed leftward, which I mean, obviously they can and they are. I don't think that it follows that we shouldn't still push for the acceptance of homosexuality, because even if this only affects urban communities, then this still is mitigating a large degree of human suffering and is like therefore desirable. I agree
Okay,
with. Yeah,
slowly, you make throwing out too many points.
sure.
I think there's a confounding with people fleeing the urban areas, moving to the rural areas, and then bringing their liberal policies with them. You know, and then I, I personally believe that this increasing left thinking, like this intensifying leftness, is associated with the mouse utopia. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Okay, this Dr. Calhoun, he was actually able to turn mice gay by putting them in a city environment, like a mouse city,
Hmm.
and then when the when their living space enclosed on them, right, like they didn't have big houses, they lived in tiny apartments, right?
Hmm.
The mice became gay. They lost heterosexual attraction. I think this might be the causal mechanism for like this increasing acceptance of homosexuality, and not so much the propaganda and brainwashing. Well, what do you think about that?
So I'm sorry. What accounts for the
Okay, in the mouse utopia experiment, James Calhoun was able to turn heterosexual mice into homosexual mice, right?
Hmm.
By overcrowding them, by imitating like a city lifestyle.
Hmm.
So this actually relates to density dependence. Do you know what that is?
No.
Okay, so if you're living in a studio apartment, right? you're probably not going to want to have 14 kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not enough space, you know. So we find that when people move to the city, they start breeding less. You know, they become less reproductive,
Mm-hmm.
and this happens with animals too. You know, if you overcrowd animals, they'll stop having sex, and
Sure.
yeah, that's basically what happened with the mouse utopia. You know, he overcrowded the mice. They stopped having sex and they started doing homosexual things. Like they became really adverse to breeding when they were overcrowded.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
So
th-
whether or not this so this is like this question is I guess kind of weird to me because like it seems like what you're disputing here is the idea that we can shift public opinion on things, but like the history of society is like the history of us, like I mean we can look at like so many different things, whether it be like economic policy or different social policies or like opinions on trans people, opinions on gay people, all of these different things. We've seen like massive shifts in public opinion over time for like a variety of different, like because of like a variety of different culture movements. I mean like the civil rights was like a massive cultural movement which through like social engineering like very clearly increased like the acceptance of like black people in the United States. Like I think this is clearly something that we can be done that can be done. um, like as far as like whether or not we're like controlling for all the right things when we look at like increasing acceptance for homosexuality, I mean we can like control for basically whatever and the trend stays the same. Like if even if we want to look at just Republicans, like even just zeroing in on right-wing people, acceptance of homosexuality has gone from 16% to 49%, and from like 96 to 2020. Even if we want to look at
among
like certain,
Republicans,
yeah, among Republicans. I mean, even if we want to look at like certain religious groups who tend to be more anti-gay than the general population, white evangelical Protestants being the most anti-gay, like significantly more anti-gay than the general population. Acceptance has gone from like 13% to 23% just between 2001 and 2014. Like
uh
I mean, like
huh.
any of these anti-fringe, even the most fringe anti-gay groups are like being brought left on this issue. Like I mean, I guess I don't want to dwell too long on this subject, because it just feels like it's generally not really contested that it's possible to change public opinion on issues.
Well, let me bring this up. Would you agree that since the civil rights movement, racism has increased?
I do not agree with that. No.
You don't agree with that? Well, because you know the racial wealth gap has increased exponentially
Sure, but I
since
don't think
the
that's a necessarily a correlate to attitudes on race. Really quickly, I just wanted to say, because you talked about earlier, like what's the cause of like increased attitudes towards homosexuality. I think that the idea that acceptance of homosexuality started to increase even more heavily after the Supreme Court, and I think 2012, maybe it was 2013, basically ruled that homosexual marriage is like federally legal. Support then like spiked. So there is a clear correlation between like normalization in society through things like legislation and increased like
Mhm,
acceptance. But
mhm.
yeah, I think
Now has that
if we look at like
has
attitudes on race, I mean, I think these have like gone up as well.
okay. Well, I do know that like in the situation of Black people, their wealth has gone down substantially since the end of segregation.
Well, that's true, but
Um,
everybody's has because that's the mechanisms of capitalism. But I don't think that's necessarily a correlate to public opinion. If you look at public opinion on like black people, people have become significantly less racist and have continued to become significantly less racist over time. I mean, like
okay, so what I
Gen
would ask
Z is
what I
like
would
the
ask you
most
is
least racist generation in like several generations.
okay. Now I would ask, has the homosexual like outcome improved since gay marriage, etc.? Like,
Yeah.
has their rate of mental illness gone down? Has the suicides gone down, etc.?
So yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I mean, in some areas, um, like legislation that push for the acceptance of homosexuality created like more suicide because of social I forget what the word social uh, uh like resistance theory, social something theory, which basically asserts that like when a ruling is passed, people become like angry about it, and they might become like even more angry, or the people who are homophobic become like more actively homophobic towards like homosexual peoples.
Yeah, I'm
But in
definitely seeing a
generally,
lot of that.
but in general, we do see that when people are less stigmatized, they are better off. So, for example, there was a study titled "Family Rejection is a Predictor of Negative Health Outcomes in White and Latino LGBT Youth," that was published
Mm-hmm.
in Pediatrics. It found that higher rates of family rejection were significantly associated with poor health outcomes. On the basis of odds ratios, lesbian, gay, and bisexual young adults who reported higher levels of family rejection during adolescence were 8.4 times more likely to report having attempted suicide, 5.9 times more likely to report high levels of depression, 3.4 times more likely to use illegal drugs, and 3.4 times more likely to report having engaged in unprotected sexual intercourse. I mean, we
Right.
can look
Now,
at, yeah,
has rates of family rejection gone down?
yeah, I think so.
You don't know. I don't know
I
either.
mean, that
I'm
that would
asking.
seem to be like the most obvious. I haven't seen data on that, but like given all the other data on like broad acceptance and so on, that would like seem to be pretty intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
And
Because
whether or not they have gone down seems like unrelated to the question of whether or not it would be better if they did go down.
uh, well, yeah, obviously it would be better if people got along,
Yeah.
but I don't think people. I think it's against our nature to get along in a lot of things.
But do you
Um,
think homosexuality is necessarily like one of those things that we just can't change public opinion about? Because like I just don't think that like I mean, even if we want to zoom out from like US, I mean, you can explain like you can like talk about like carpetbaggers or whatever. We can look at like out even outside the US. So there was a 1986 paper by this dude named Walter Williams, who, and it was a really interesting analysis because he basically went around the world and interviewed elderly people to learn about like tribal customs in certain culture that predated like Western influences. And
uh huh.
basically, he looked at Native American, Siberian, Japanese, Chinese, African, all kinds of different societies to study social acceptance of same-sex marriage. And in all of these societies, um, uh, out of all these societies, like several of them had like widespread cultural acceptance of homosexuality, which incorporated homosexual marriage into like traditional like family structures. So I just like don't see any evidence that this is something that's like in like something that we can't overcome, or something that's just always going to happen, or something that's intrinsic. Like I don't buy that empirically.
Now, do you know like what was the prevalence of homosexuality in those cultures?
The like how much homosexuality there was.
Yeah.
I he didn't because this was like a qualitative analysis. Like he wasn't collecting like data on like the number
Hmm.
of people, so it was more just like seeing how accepted homosexuality was. Um, do you think that that would like influence it in any way, or?
Yeah, if he's looking at like tribal communities, there's not a lot of people, and statistically, gay is like very, very small percentage of people. So I mean, they might not even like have ever met a gay. They're just like, oh, well, that idea doesn't seem too bad.
Well, I mean, like, of these cultures clearly interacted with gay people because they concocted ways to integrate homosexual marriage like into the traditional family structure.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to talk about like what kinds of things, whether it's like the number of gay people or whatever, like correlate to like less homosexuality, there was a study like a while in like 2018. It was called "Examining Public Opinion About LGBTQ Related Issues in the United States and Across Multiple Nations." And what it basically found was that like economic development, democracy, prevalence of religion, these things are all like correlated to like acceptance for like homosexuality. Um,
Say that
so
last
yeah,
one again.
I just like prevalence of religion was one of them. So like yeah, it just doesn't seem like this is some like intrinsic thing that has to be a part of society. And I would ask you, if it isn't that way, then like why ought we not push against this?
Okay. So back to first cause. If you go to prison and you like announce that you're gay and you're beat up, I don't think those prisoners are thinking, "Oh, God hates gays." That like they intuitively know that this is a target for predation. You know.
Um, I mean, I don't know, like, I guess, like, what relevance that has, like
Well,
what's how's that supposed to like connect to the argument, I guess.
being gay is it's an abnormal thing, right? And a predator is going to spot weakness and prey on it. This is why like kids get bullied. They have
Sure,
some kind of weakness is detected by the predator, right?
sure. So like,
And
but
you're talking about like removing all the predators from Earth. I just don't even think that's possible.
a couple different ways in which I think this premise fails is like well, for one, I think that the perception of gay people like as weaker does have like cultural like homophobic foundations, which is like what I'm trying to address. So like for
Mm-hmm.
example, this is like a historical example, like Greek soldiers used to like go into battle like with their boyfriends and would like use that as like a motivation while they were like engaging in like bloody war, right? Like I mean these were
But
like pretty
hold
tough
on,
fucking people, right? So like
Bounty, that's extreme predation. Like that's what they do to you in prison after they beat you up.
sure, but what I'm saying is that I think that the perception that you're appealing to of gay people as like weak or people to be preyed upon is based in like homophobic cultural constructs, which is what I'm trying to address. And B, I think that even if there are always going to be certain characteristics of gay people which make certain people prey on them, that's disconnected from the question of whether or not there are large amounts of or large like kinds of different stigma that exists in society against homosexuality and
Wait,
whether or not
you
addressing
cut out
those.
after large. You said
Oh,
large,
sure,
then you
sure.
cut out.
So whether or not, what I'm saying is whether or not there will always be like certain kinds of situations wherein gay people will be preyed upon. That's
Mm-hmm.
disconnected from the question of whether or not there are still other kinds of stigma against homosexuals that we would be able to eliminate a significant degree of human suffering in addressing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I interpret it as it's a masculine versus feminine thing. I think what's being perceived as weak is the effeminate male, and
Okay.
yeah, and I think the like the top or the dom. I think that's it seems like a hyper predator, like a predator um, exploiting like a weak male. You know,
Okay.
that's how I perceive it. I think that is the general attitude. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, I mean I think that's the uh, uh, primary attitude, but again, I don't think that it's the primary. I think that's a product of like cultural stigmas against and like homophobic stigmas against homosexuals. But that's the whole thing that I'm like advocating we address, right?
Well, do you think that effeminate men have to be effeminate?
Um, I, I don't know. Like I no, I think any sort of like effeminate man can change to be less effeminate, but I don't think we should be trying to foster a culture wherein people have to change like how they are to like fit like cultural norms to avoid being stigmatized. I think the best kind of society to foster is a kind of society wherein people are able to express themselves in any way they want and not be stigmatized for that, because like I believe in freedom, and that is freedom. Freedom is the
Mm-hmm.
ability to direct one's life and live as one wants without like hindrance or constraint. So I think telling people, hey, if you express yourself in this way, um, you're going to be like stigmatized and rejected. I think that creates a lot of unnecessary suffering. I think it limits freedom. I think it's generally just a pretty fucked up thing to do in society. So I
Right.
don't think we should be doing that.
Now, like regardless of your preference, I mean, you'd agree that people adapt to cultural norms to accumulate like political capital, social capital, economic
They
capital.
can sometimes, yeah,
Like
sure.
when Chinese migrate to the West, they change their name from Lin Dong Fook to David Lee,
Yeah, sure.
right? They can assimilate.
Yeah, sure. Sometimes people accrue to cultural norms to like gain social or political capital. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
of course. I just don't like think that's like, um, a relevant like counter argument to like the point I'm trying to make.
Well, we see that migrants, successful migrants, they're going to try to assimilate. And I just see the open homosexual is not assimilating. You know, he's
Not assimilating in the sense that they're not like
it's like a
pretending
counterculture.
pretending to not be. Yeah, well, so do you know why countercultures develop? Like countercultures develop like there would be no homosexual counterculture if homosexuality wasn't stigmatized in the first place, because a counterculture by definition is just like a little cultural enclave that goes against prevailing cultural narratives. And so like if the prevailing cultural narrative wasn't that homosexuality is bad, then homosexuality wouldn't be a counterculture. So it sounds like this is just an argument for like what I've been advocating for.
But you would agree that the counterculture gets a hard a hard line in life, right? Like normal people are just gonna like not treat them the same. They're gonna have stigma, right?
Well, I mean, any counterculture, I guess, to an extent. But the two things that I would say to this is, A, this just sounds like an argument as to why we should make it so that being gay doesn't make you part of the counterculture, because gay people are just accepted, like, by society at large, in which case it wouldn't need to be a counterculture. So that just sounds
Mm.
like an argument for, like, for that
I,
position. But,
I don't know at what point counterculture becomes normal. But my argument
well, there are
in the
different things that are
original,
counterculture, right? Like
uh,
counterculture is just a category for different kinds of expression, or that different kinds of expression and stuff can fit into at different points in time. So it's very
mhm.
possible to make something that isn't counterculture. Or it's very possible to take something that is currently considered counterculture and make it not counterculture. I mean, this is like why like conservatives say all the time, like conservatism is the new counterculture, or whatever like cringy shit they like to say. Like it's because everyone like acknowledges that like counter what is considered counterculture can and does shift over time.
I do think the far right is a new counterculture.
Depending on how you define counterculture.
Well, I mean, what? I don't want to use the word Nazi because you call everyone a Nazi, but like actual Nazis, you know, people that identify as Nazis are generally stigmatized, even by conservatives, you know.
Yeah. But I would say like as opposed to like homosexuality, which isn't a harmful thing to be, so it shouldn't be stigmatized. I think that being a Nazi is generally a harmful thing to be, and so that should be stigmatized.
Well, well, hold on, Mouthy, you're a Nazi is a fundamental part of someone's identity that should be respected.
Right, but so the reason that we stigmatize things is because if something is harmful, then it can be useful to stigmatize that so that it's less prevalent in society. Because being a Nazi or being a murderer is something harmful, I'm fine with that being stigmatized. But in terms of something like homosexuality, I do not believe that homosexuality is something which is intrinsically harmful, and so all stigmatizing homosexuality does is create like a lot of undue suffering in society.
Right, but see, I would say like if I told my grandma I was gay, that would cause her suffering because
Right,
she's
wait, so
conservative. It
so
would
that
hurt her feelings.
so that's an argument as to why
She
we
might
should.
commit suicide.
Right, so that's an argument as to why we should like change the culture so that people don't react negatively when you come
Change
out as
which
gay.
culture?
What'd you say?
Well, hold on. Let's change the gay culture so they're not open about it.
Well, no, because if we just try to make the gay culture, I feel like we're running around in circles. I mean, if we try to change the gay culture in such a way that they're just not open about it, then we're creating a lot of suffering for people who have to hide who they are. And I don't see any reason to do that when we could
Well,
just make it
hold
so
on.
that
Well,
nobody's reacting negatively.
how does hiding your your perversions and stuff? How does that create suffering?
You don't think that hiding like a fundamental part of who you are from your family, knowing that if you were honest about like who you were, then they wouldn't accept you? You don't think that's like a
Uh,
heavy mental
uh,
burden for people to like
Hold
carry
on.
with them?
I'm a heterosexual. I don't make a big deal out of it. You know.
Well, that's because if you came out as heterosexual, nobody would care. The reason it's a big deal is because people react negatively when people come out as gay.
Right. So these people that are coming out, they know that they're going to get a backlash, right? They know they're going to be stigmatized, and that's why I said reverse causation because these people are creating the stigma. by bringing it upon themselves, right? Like by advertising themselves as gay, by telling their parents they're gay, they know they're going to get kicked out, right? They're on a self-destructive path.
Well, but
Like
that doesn't make
I
sense
don't know
because
why you would tell your parents that.
that doesn't make sense because like if you're saying like they create the stigma by coming out, the only reason why they would be stigmatized for coming out is if there's a pre-existing cultural stigma. So I don't think that
Mm-hmm.
proves like the order of causation that you're arguing for here.
Well,
I
I
think
know
that
there's
like
a, I
you keep
know,
saying that like if they just didn't come out, then they wouldn't be like abused by their family. And of course I agree, but the question that you're not really grappling with here is why would it not be preferable to have a society where they aren't forced to like keep it a secret, where they just wouldn't be stigmatized if they came out.
I no, I totally agree with you that
Okay.
in a utopia, right, we're gonna have like no stigmas, but I just don't
So
see how that's
so,
possible.
so you
I don't.
okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that like I mean, if you agree that it would be preferable to not stigmatize homosexuality, and your only contention is that it just doesn't seem likely that we're going to be able to effectively destigmatize homosexuality.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, I
Malky,
I think
even though I agree with you, right, I myself would stigmatize gay children. Like if my kid came out as gay, I would kick him out of the house. I would
why?
not tolerate
If you acknowledge that something is harmful, then why would you perpetuate that thing?
it because I feel it at the visceral level. I feel it like I feel uncomfortable, right? And if my kid came and told me that he's gay, like, why is he telling me this? It's making me uncomfortable, right? Get the fuck
So
out of my
like
house.
you think that like you would kick your kids out for like saying something that makes you uncomfortable?
Yeah, it's highly disrespectful.
To be honest, it's disrespectful for your kid to be honest about who they are.
Uh, yeah, yeah. If they know that I'm not going to tolerate it, and they come and tell me, they're asking for trouble.
But you're begging the question, why is it something that you should be not tolerating?
Well, I don't even know. I've always been this way, like from a young age. I've always felt viscerally repulsed by gay people.
Do you not think that if we have strong feelings that we can't really justify, that that's not like reason for us to do some self-reflection on like maybe we shouldn't feel this way towards these people, maybe we shouldn't attack people, or maybe we shouldn't like inflict significant harm upon people and like harm their lives to a very strong degree just because we might have like a visceral negative reaction to something that we can't even really justify.
Um, well, maybe if I understood the cause, but I don't. I don't understand the cause of my feeling.
I mean, there's
Um,
like, I mean, the cause can be like a variety of different things. I mean, there is like do you mean the cause of your feeling or the cause of homosexuality?
no, no, the cause of my feeling towards homosexuality. I don't understand it.
Well, it would seem that
Like
the most.
the first time I saw gay sex or gay porn, right? I was on a website reading about these bug chasers.
Mhm.
You know what a bug chaser is?
No.
It's a community. It's a subculture in the gay community where they're purposefully trying to spread AIDS, right?
Wow, that's bad.
So I was on this website where like it's like a hookup site for bioterrorism, right? And they
Mhm.
got this picture of a guy getting rammed in the ass, right? And I actually threw up. I felt so queasy in my stomach, like I threw up, right?
Okay.
I just, yeah, like everything about this is just gross to me, dude.
Okay.
Um, yeah, it's totally abnormal, and I can understand. Like, I see both sides. Like, I can understand why, like, violent people would be violent towards that. I can understand why the Muslims throw gays off roof, and I can also understand why people would tolerate this stuff. Like they would like swallow their pride. I think maybe they're swallowing their pride to tolerate it. You know, uh, but I just feel like it's beneath my dignity to accept that in my household. Like I would not accept that in my household.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess I'm not like I don't think I'm like super qualified to like do like any sort of like psychoanalysis as to why
Oh yeah,
you
I hear
have these
it.
kinds of reactions. So yeah, I
But
mean,
but
I
can you
think
can
that's
you understand like can you understand like I described like queasiness, the need to vomit,
I
right?
don't
Like you can relate with that, right?
I don't personally have any visceral negative reaction to homosexuality or anything like that, but
Mhm.
I can. I don't think
Maybe
that.
he's gay.
Well, I don't think that it's inherently wrong to I don't think that's inherently wrong to have negative visceral reactions to things. I think it is wrong to I guess act on that. Like it's therefore immoral because you personally think it's gross. Um,
Mm,
but yeah, I mean, I guess I guess we've kind of reached the end point of this. I'm not sure. I mean, if there's another point you want to bring up, I think we've kind of hit bedrock because I don't know how qualified I am to like psychoanalyze why you have the reactions to homosexuality that you do.
yeah, yeah, I hear you. But yeah, dude, it was good talking to you.
Yeah,
I
you
really
too. It
enjoyed this conversation.
was a nice chat.
Hmm.
You take care.
Okay, take you too.
All right, see you, bud. That was extremely fucking bizarre. Oh my god. Holy shit. Um, yeah. Well, okay.